Hello, Portable for kids and Portable for parents. Here's a little decimal review. I thought I'd put this little video together that gives you some of the key concepts when working with decimals. Now, sometimes with numbers, there are things that are just measured in whole numbers. For example, like bowling balls. You rarely see half a bowling ball. So you would just measure things in whole numbers, but not everything is like that. Some things can be measured in part of a whole. For example, pie, which I love. If I ate all this pie, I would be eating 1 1/10 of a pie, or 1.1. Here's a quick look at decimals. One of the key things is really having a good handle on the names of each of the place values. Now, we did this last test in the first part of the chapter, but of course, there's the ones, there's your tenths, there's your hundredths, there's your thousandth. Watch out for the TH, of course, on the end. Now, if you're in grade 6, you need to know to a thousandth, and if you're in grade 5, you're only working to the hundredths. Okay? So there is also this relationship between decimals and fractions. So this, of course, is 2/10. So the way you would write that as a fraction, you could represent that as 2/10, or 2 parts out of 10, 2/10. And as we go along, if you wanted to represent this as a fraction, this decimal, you would write 23/100. You can imagine a whole thing being broken up into 100 parts, and you are talking about 23 of those parts. And of course, finally for grade 6, this decimal could be represented as 234/1000. Again, you imagine a whole thing being broken up into 1,000 parts, but you're only interested in 234 of those. Another part you need to know for this section is the proper way of naming decimals in words. In words, you would say something like, this is 7 2/10. So 7 whole and 2/10. But as we go along, what you do now is you wouldn't call this 7 2/10 and 300ths. What you would do is, because hundredths is the smallest unit in this decimal, you talk about it based on hundredths. So this becomes 7 23/100ths. So whatever the lowest place value that's available in the decimal, if it's tenths, you talk about it as tenths. If it's hundredths, you talk about it as hundredths. But again, for the grade 6s, the smallest unit, in a sense, in this decimal is thousands. So in this case, it would be 7 234 thousandths. There are different ways to represent decimals. Often what we do is we use kind of a pictorial example. Let's say we're going to use this square to represent a single whole. Because we're talking about tenths in this example, we'll cut it up into 10 strips. And each strip in this example is 1/10 of a whole. Now, in my decimal, I have 0.2 or 2/10. So that would end up looking like this. That's how I'd represent 2/10. Now, as we go further, we're going to divide up this square into smaller and smaller sections. When we're talking about hundredths, it changes now. I can still see the 10 strips, but I've also cut those 10 strips themselves into 10. So altogether now I have 100 little cubes in this, 100 little squares in this one big square. So if I was representing this, I'd first add my 2/10, and now I'm going to do 300ths, and that's just 3 of the cubes because each cube is 100th. So that's what that would look like. Now, when we get to grade 6, we need to be able to represent it in terms of thousands. Again, I can still see the 10 strips. I can still see the 100 boxes, but each individual box is now further divided up into 10 little tiny sections. So let's see what that would look like. So I start again first by representing the 2/10. There's my 2/10. Now I talk about 300. So, but like before, that's 3 boxes. Now I have to get 6,000. So let's zoom in a little bit and take a look at what that might look like. There is my 6 little boxes there, 6 little parts of the whole. And so altogether I have 2/10, 300ths, and 6 thousandths, or 236 thousandths. I always think that rounding and estimating are kind of like cousins a little bit. It's kind of like when you're rounding something, you don't need all of the detail. You just want to give an approximation of the value that you're looking at. Let's say Usain Bolt's having a slow day and he runs 100 at 10.865 seconds, and his coach wants to know how he did. Well, maybe the coach doesn't want to know all of the value all the way to the hundreds or the thousands. Just give it to me to the tenth, so then we can round it so that, well, he ran about 10.9 seconds. And that's the basic idea behind rounding. So there is two things typically we talk about: rounding up and rounding down. And we make a little bit of an evaluation. Now, we'll talk about it, but in rounding up, you do one thing, and in rounding down, you do something else. In rounding up, the numbers will change. In rounding down, the target number doesn't change. So that's something that we have to watch out for. Let's take a look at some examples to kind of see what I'm talking about. Here's, first of all, the steps. I've taught the kids how to do this. Is first of all, look at the place value target. If they say round to the nearest tenth, then it's the tenth you're looking for. That's the target number, I would say. And the second thing you need to do is evaluate the digit that's to the right of that target. Let's look at an example. So here I am. I got 16.45. I'm rounding to the nearest tenth. So the way I've taught the students is to underline the target. So let's say we're underlining the 10th number, it's a 4, and then we're going to circle the number that we're going to evaluate. Now, when you're evaluating, if it's 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4, you're going to end up rounding down. And if it's 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9, we're going to round up, and what you do is you add 1. That target number, in this case the 4, two things can happen to it when we're rounding. One is that the number will stay the same, and two, the number will increase, but the number will never decrease. When I round down, that 4 never becomes a 3. It's either going to be a 4 or a 5. In this example, of course, because the number to the right is a 5, that means I'm going to round up, and that 4 becomes a 5. So this is going to end up being 16.5. Now, because they've asked for the value to the nearest tenth, you do not give them a value in the hundredth column. They don't want to know that. They said to the tenth, give them information to the tenth. So if you gave me that 0 there, I probably would give you a half a mark for that kind of question. Let's do another one. Rounding to the nearest hundredth. So I underline the 5 this time. It's in the hundredth column. And I evaluate the 4. The 4 is, of course, in the rounding down category. So that means that 5 is not going to change. It's going to be 16.45, and I would not do 16.450. So let's take another one. This one could be a little tricky. Even though you have lots of different decimals in a number, sometimes they won't ask for you to round to the tenth or hundredths. Sometimes they'll ask you to round to a whole number. Let's try this one. Let's round to the nearest tenths. Tens, not tenth. So tens. So the 1 is the tenths number, and I'm going to evaluate that 6 because it is in the rounding up category. Then that means the 1 is going to increase, and that'll give me 20 this time. Okay? So just watch out. Sometimes you have to actually round whole numbers too. So that's a quick video, hopefully quick, of the key decimal concepts for this part of the chapter. Yeah, hope that's okay. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.